The small tube's connected to the even smaller tube. Holy crap, I haven't seen this in decades, but I still remember all the lines in the 16th episode of the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. Yes! We are finally here. I was always looking forward to this match, but it wasn't until I sat down to watch them again that it really hit me just how much I loved Power Ranger punks as a little kid. I really did start quoting dialogue only to recoil in shock because I didn't know I knew it. So who do we take on next? Recording shows off of the TV was a huge pastime of mine, and I must have watched this episode a lot. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure I had the novelization of this episode as well. There was just something about it that captured my imagination. I was certainly enraptured at the sight of the Rangers' flailing legs sticking out of a giant frog's mouth. I like narratives where the characters are picked off one by one. I think there was another reason too. I might have been in love. I was 8, don't judge me. It was Kimberly. Boys wanted her, girls wanted to be her. I wanted both. Good guys go bad is always a great concept. Having a consistent plot that makes sense provides a far better canvas for Amy Jo Johnson and David Yost to ham it up than switching places does. Okay, so a frog monster who eats people has nothing to do with two heroes turning bad, but it does naturally allow for those two characters to be the last ones standing against said monster. My point is, this is a very good episode. Naturally, when I was watching Zyuranger to make my original videos in 2010, Be Careful of Shaved Ice was an episode I was very much looking forward to. It likewise did not disappoint. Both of these are probably among my favorite episodes of their respective series, so I'm a little sad to have to pit them against each other. I love both of them! Anyway, let's get started. You know what's probably largely responsible for Power Ranger punks being so good? It's the exact same story as Be Careful of Shaved Ice. As I've said many times, Power Rangers doesn't have to copy the Sentai, but it does ensure that all the footage they're repurposing actually works. It certainly helps the Power Rangers formula that this is one of the few Zyuranger episodes not to include a Kid of the Week plot. In both shows, the weird vampire minion spikes refreshments with a potion that turns two of the heroes into delinquents. They cause mayhem while the Untainted have to fight against a new monster. They ultimately fail, but thankfully, the mentor character comes up with an antidote. It's up to the newly reformed heroes, and ultimately the girl character's bow and arrow, to save the day. Cue a wacky hijinks coda as their bad behavior catches up with them. This is as straight up an adaptation as I think I've seen so far. But, of course, there are still a lot of details that are different. The first obvious difference is the episode order. This is the 26th episode of Zyuranger, the 4th installment after Burai allies himself with the Zyurangers. However, this is only the 12th episode of Power Rangers. In fact, it looks like it was the 11th to air. Either way, it substantially predates any kind of 6th Ranger. The Power Rangers are very much a 5-person team here. What gives? Well, simply put, Burai does not appear in Be Careful of Shaved Ice. There are, in fact, a handful of episodes like this, which fits in Zyuranger. Burai is not part of the group. He holes up in his timeless room so he won't die. It's perfectly reasonable to write episodes where the Zyurangers can handle things on their own, and where we can presume Burai simply doesn't feel the need to involve himself. Having reviewed these in order, I can question their decision to put one of those episodes here, directly following 3 episodes in which he does practically nothing. But in general, I can get behind this. In Power Rangers, as I've stated before, Tommy is a full member of the group. He has no reason not to be involved. So rather than come up with some awkward excuse dialogue like, oh, Tommy had to visit his grandma this week, Power Rangers push some of these post-Burai, non-Burai plots to earlier in the season. It's amazing how perfectly they fit within their respective shows. This is another episode where the heroes play sports and where a henchman concocts his own plan. I feel Zyuranger was running short on ideas here. Unlike basketball, the volleyball in Power Ranger Punks actually contributes to the story, as people playing a high-energy game often need to drink something. In fact, this opening works a bit better than the doubles tennis game in Be Careful of Shaved Ice. I was surprised how fast this opening moves. We can barely register that the characters are wearing douchey tennis clothes before May breaks it up with her frozen treats. Power Ranger Punks takes its time with its opening scenes. And that's probably due to padding so they don't have to do as much with the main conceit. When time needs to be filled, just throw in a putty scene. But it works. Babu is distracting the Power Rangers from his plot and making them as thirsty as possible so they'll drink. The putty fight is once again shot with so many jump cuts, slow-mo, and repeat sequences that I got a little dizzy. But the music and choreography do a good job of making it feel tense, like the Power Rangers are in actual danger rather than killing time. Zyuranger needed something like this, as it seems odd no one would notice in this public place Toadpot flying around spiking desserts. Even the justification for only poisoning 2 members works better in Power Rangers, as they have a winded Billy and Kimberly run over to the drinks table long before the other 3 get there. It seems like a small thing, and in the grand scheme of things it is, but in Zyuranger, Dawn and May have to react immediately so that the other 3 Zyurangers don't have a chance to dig in. Like I said, it just feels a little rushed and doesn't allow for any suspense. Anyway, before long, our bad Rangers get makeovers into ludicrously cartoony stereotypes. Ratty clothes, heavy makeup, popping gum. Our straight-laced heroes are very confused. And the punks immediately meet resistance. Here's another case in which Power Rangers has an established edge. Billy and Kimberly turn into bullies? Well, how stupid would you be if you didn't pair them up against Bulk and Skull? It practically writes itself. Kimberly makes a date with Skull, and Billy straight up robs Bulk. On that note, Billy is actually the best choice to turn into a punk, because it creates the biggest contrast to his regular character. Any member of either of these groups would work because they're so straight-laced, but Dawn is already brash and arrogant, so while it works great, it's not as big a shock as seeing Billy Bully Bulk. Well, that's a tough one to say. Zyuranger has to invent a gang for Dawn and May to fight. And I do mean fight. Despite all the praise I just gave to Power Rangers, Zyuranger deserves credit for how crazy it goes with this premise. Dawn and May beat the crap out of these people. May breaks a chair over Boy's head. They both work for different reasons. Zyuranger plays up the concept, Power Rangers plays up the character dynamics. Zyuranger is funny because of what the characters do, Power Rangers is funny because of who the characters are. Clearly though, Power Rangers seems a bit squeamish at letting their characters be too bad, which leads to the biggest change. May and Dawn run around unchecked for most of the episode. Kimberly and Billy get this one scene, before Zordon sticks their asses in jail. After that, they just make corny Beavis and Butthead quips at Zordon and Alpha.
Wow, look at that cool frog. Wartsville.
It's fun, but just take a tiny peek at what you're missing out on. Yeah, Dawn and May murder people. Groups of people. More than once. It's hilarious and shocking, and I love it. And I don't understand why so many people don't get that this is clearly not supposed to be taken literally. These are obviously hyper-stylized genre parodies that are meant to figuratively represent these 2 characters getting into trouble. Do you think these loudmouth, blunt instrument, dumb as rocks, lazy delinquents are really pulling off Master of Disguise heist on the mob? It's obvious why Power Rangers didn't keep any of this stuff, but it's so amazing. Zyuranger has a habit lately of not giving away the monster of the episode. Bondora will fiendishly announce she has a plan, and then suddenly a monster will show up and do awful things. We know how monsters come to be in this show, so we don't need to see it every time. And so it is for Dora Bugaranan. That's a fun one. With things already bad enough, he's a shocking double whammy for the remaining Zyurangers. Power Rangers really wants to shove this down our throats, so we have to have the standard Rita tells Fenster to build the monster and he talks about what the monster does scene, reusing the same footage I set gags to a year ago in the 6th episode of this review series. The show adds Zyuranger footage as a flashback to when the villains used Terror Toad on some other planet, I appreciate the sense of history, and I always like when Zyuranger footage can fit in a different context, but this is getting a bit old. For the crowning example of Zyuranger footage being used in a different but fitting context, observe the viewing globe. So both mentors come up with a solution for the punk poison problem. Barza concludes the juice of the Mandragora will cure Dawn and May. While the Zyurangers are fighting Dora Bugaranan, he sets off in search of it, with Bandora dispatching golems to stop him. However, he uses his knowledge that the Mandragora's cry will banish anyone to hell, as established in a flashback, to fend them off. This is great because Barza doesn't get that much to do. But it's even better because Power Rangers is actually able to use this. They cut out Barza's flashback, but turn Barza's actual events into a flashback, casting him in the role of a younger Zordon. They only use the wide shots, so you can't see him too clearly, but this blew my mind as a kid. It was so cool getting this glimpse into Zordon's past and seeing him kick butt, and it looked so different that I wondered where it came from. It really is an amazingly clever tactic to get value out of footage they otherwise couldn't use. Good job. Part of me wishes they could have used this for real though, because they still had to remake this for Power Rangers, subbing in Alpha getting the singing squash as it's now called. It looks absolutely terrible. They just turned on a fog machine and laid down some plastic sheets. I guess this is the garbage bag dimension. Still, it's nice seeing Alpha get to do something, it's just not nearly as good or fitting as what they already watched on TV. Kind of a letdown. The singing squash demonstrates how averse to mythology Power Rangers continues to be. I wonder if they would have been more amenable to calling their plant Mandragora if this had come out after Harry Potter became a big hit. Something else I always enjoyed as a kid was noticing how stock footage didn't necessarily align every time it's reused. And I'm not talking about Japanese to American, I'm talking about the Morphin roll call that's the same in every episode. While Dawn and May, for some reason, take the time to change back into their regular clothes while their teammates are suffering and dying without them, Billy and Kimberly morph straight into the battle as soon as they recover. It's so obvious these looks don't match. That so tickled me as a child that when I would draw my own Power Rangers stories, I would purposely find an excuse to, for example, get Billy out of his glasses before they morph, just so I could draw the morphing sequence as inconsistently as the show did. While the ending fight broadly stays the same, with the team whittled down to just the pink-colored ranger who shoots her arrow into the monster's weak point, there is enough untransformed footage involved that a surprising amount is lost. The first few major changes aren't even caused by that. The monster's weak spot ends up being his gaping open neck, fancy that. In Zyuranger, Geki's research indicates his true face is his weak point, and May eventually realizes that spot is his true face. In Power Rangers, Kimberly just goes, "Hey, giant gaping hole, let's aim for that." Fair enough, but the problem is what follows. Power Rangers decides now is the time to give Billy some flowery language.
I know I could get him with my blade blaster, if we just transpose ourselves.
That immediately read as awkward and unnecessary to me, and I just knew the Zyuranger dialogue had more purpose. Sure enough, the original scene is Dawn realizing May will have to take the shot, and in order to give her her moment, he'll sacrifice himself. So, funnily enough, the point of this scene is the exact opposite, and far better in Zyuranger. In Power Ranger Punks, Billy is carelessly failing the same way everyone else does. In Be Careful of Shaved Ice, Dawn is being uniquely heroic, appropriate given his focus in this episode. I can't complain too much because ultimately Dawn's sacrifice doesn't amount to anything, as Toppat shows up to ruin May's shot. But that's where things get really different. In Power Rangers, after getting pushed down, Kimberly simply gets back up again, fires her shot, and frees the other Rangers, after which she delivers the final blow. In Zyuranger, Bugaranan decides to take it nice and slow with this last one. This causes her to de-transform, but she escapes into the woods. The two villains hunt for her, and she eventually admits defeat. However, it's a trap with her own body as the linchpin. When Bugaranan lifts her into the air, it breaks her tether and launches sharp sticks into his weak point. That's when the other Zyurangers are freed and May fires her final shot. Obviously, Power Rangers couldn't use any of this, but Zyuranger undeniably presents a more satisfying climax. In order to fill in the gaps caused by the cut footage, Power Rangers uses May footage from the next Zyuranger episode, which, ridiculously enough, has an almost identical conclusion to this one. So that's that. This is a wonderfully entertaining Zyuranger episode, and what I would consider to be the gold standard of a first season Power Rangers episode. It's amazing how solid the show can be when it doesn't fight against its own material. So anyway, here we are. The moment of truth. For story, I have to give this a tie. I mean, it's the same story. They both do it well. Power Rangers really doesn't lose anything of consequence. Each show does something better than the other and it ends up balancing out. For characters, I'm going to have to give it to Power Rangers. As much as I love the campy fantasy pieces, I admit they basically mask that there's not much going on with the actual characters here. The rival gang is fun, but pairing Billy and Kimberly with Bulk and Skull is much more satisfying. That said, I feel kinda bad for Bulk and Skull at the end. They really don't do anything wrong, and the Rangers do nothing to smooth over the misunderstanding that they caused. Finally, for action, the parts of the final battle Power Rangers had to cut out buoys up Zyurangers significantly for a much cleverer finale. It's fine in Power Rangers, but it's better in Zyuranger. And so, mercifully for me, I get to give this one a tie. They're both undeniably fantastic and are both worth watching. So our next matchup is the Spitflower versus I Want to Eat May? Well, that certainly is a title. Look, there are many ways I could joke about the unintended double entendre introduced by this specific translation choice, most of which would probably objectify the actress by proxy, so I won't. To distract from it, I'd rather just continue to embarrass myself. Those Power Ranger stories I made up as a kid? I included myself as the new Purple Ranger, and Kimberly was my girlfriend? Teenage girlfriend to an 8-year-old? So, self-insertion fic, using Turbo's worst idea years before that show thought of it, squicky romance, and it was for school. You've forgotten about that title already, haven't you? Anyway, these episodes again give the focus to Kimberly/May. Like I already said, Power Ranger Punks pulls footage from this episode because it's so interchangeable that they could get away with it. It blows my mind Zyuranger would put these episodes back to back. In Power Rangers, it's not really a problem. Since Barai does make an appearance in this episode, the Spitflower is grouped with the Tommy episodes long after Power Ranger Punks. In fact, I'd argue that I Want to Eat May has more in common with Shaved Ice than it does the MMPR episode adapting it. Both are about the pink-colored Rangers, and both have flowers. That's about it. Since I Want to Eat May is largely about legend and mythology and prehistoric times, you can see why Power Rangers wanted nothing to do with any of that. But they do find a way to keep the flower motif relevant in a way that fits their series. In Zyuranger, Dora Guzzler arrives to eat and corrupt all the flowers that Bondora hates, turning them into Little Shop of Horrors monstrosities. In Power Rangers, Rita is inspired to do the same with the Spitflower due to Kimberly's model parade float. And I should point out that, once again, Power Rangers feels compelled to add in an expository Finster scene, just so we don't get confused as to where the monster comes from. It's the same footage again! I will continue scratching my head at Zyuranger putting these two episodes back to back. However, doing so allowed me to watch these Power Rangers episodes back to back, and I am loving how it exposes their bag of tricks. May loves flowers and has, naturally, befriended a little boy who grows them. She even finds he has regrown the Elysium flower, once treasured by her tribe. Koshi uncovers the legend of the Risha tribe, where a prior identical princess sacrificed her life to defeat the Guzzler, and the other Zyurangers become convinced May intends to do the same thing. But she's a strong, independent woman, who's only offering herself up as bait in order to impale the monster with her arrows. You know, exactly like the last episode. The Guzzler even ensnares her and intends to eat her like the last episode. Seriously, what happened here? The Spitflower is perhaps infamous for demonstrating the depths of Rita Repulsa's pettiness, as she sends down a regiment of putties to the juice bar for no other reason than to wreck Kimberly's float model and make her feel bad. Yeah, I mean, she could send down a giant monster to step on Kimberly's house, but this is how she spends her resources instead. But, you know, it fits the tone of the show, this is for kids and all. It's nice to see actual emotion here, as low stakes as it ultimately is. Honestly, this episode is most interesting to me in how it handles Tommy. Zyuranger uses Barai in the exact same way it's been using him, which is to say, he shows up for a few seconds to save the Zyurangers and then is never seen again. The main difference here is that rather than come in and save them at the end, he comes in and saves them in the middle. And honestly, it's extremely awkward. Oh, not the actual saving, that's pretty cool. He swoops in and fires a beam with the Zhu Soken. It's more than he's done in any other episode he's been in since he changed sides. But then they summon their guardian beasts and Dora Guzzler kicks their butts, leading to the end of act cliffhanger. I'm on board, let's shake up the formula. The only problem is, that commercial break is desperately hoping it'll keep you from piecing together the two halves of this episode. The Zyurangers get their butts kicked, we come back from commercial, they're moping around going, "Aw man, this sucks, I wish we could beat this guy." So what happened in between those two scenes? Either Dora Guzzler returned to its normal size and escaped, which doesn't make a lot of sense given he clearly had the Zyurangers on the ropes and could have finished them off. More likely given the context is that the Zyurangers simply gave up and went home, allowing the giant monster to continue trashing the city. And what do you imagine Barai does? Ooh, that looks painful, but I gotta go. Yeah, it looks like you guys got this. I'm out of here. And he's gone for the rest of the episode. Nice assist there, big bro. They had to put a commercial break here because otherwise it becomes too obvious that none of this makes any sense. I feel bad for Power Rangers having to fix this craziness. They already have enough self-inflicted problems trying to shove Tommy into a Barai-shaped hole every episode. Now they have a bunch of footage that doesn't even make sense on its own. But they do what they can. Tommy has mysteriously wandered off from the others to, as we'll later learn, try to fix Kimberly's float model. Zordon still seems to forget that Tommy exists and that Jason's not the only Power Ranger with a communicator, but Barai's early bird footage allows Zordon to remember him reasonably quickly. And Child Me gets to be happy again that Tommy's cap clearly doesn't match his morphing sequence. Once the Spitflower kicks the not Mega Dragon Zord's butt, Zordon withdraws all the Rangers back to the command center to save them from certain death and make a new plan. He analyzes the monster to determine that Kimberly's power bow can defeat it. The attack strategy is less elegant than Zyurangers, but getting the Power Rangers out of fight number 1 makes a heck of a lot more sense. The American writers must have been so confused. Usually we're the ones screwing up your plots. We're not used to having to make things better. This does create one more problem, and while their solution is a valiant effort, it doesn't quite work. Zordon sends the Power Rangers back into battle, but not Tommy. You stay here, just in case. I guess the ubiquitous teamwork message doesn't apply to him. Given that Tommy can't combine his weapon with the others, I suppose there's some logic to it. But from a storytelling perspective, you naturally assume they're setting up a scenario where Tommy is going to be the last man standing. No, he just warms the bench, and gets to give Alpha a high five when his teammates do all the work without him. You'd never believe this schmuck eventually becomes the longest-serving team leader in the show's history. Let's score them. For story, I'm giving it to Power Rangers. Zyuranger has a better backstory, but Power Rangers does a far better job at stitching together the, frankly, broken pieces of Zyuranger's plot. For characters, May has some good stuff, no question, and I love the tension of the idea that she might sacrifice herself for the greater good. But MMPR gives Tommy an absence that's episode-specific, and more importantly, uses it to further the potential romance between Kimberly and Tommy. Surprising her with her float in the parade is a wonderfully fitting ending. Giving it to Power Rangers. Finally, for action, Zyuranger's final fight is far better set up and realized. Unfortunately, Power Rangers has to cut a decent amount of it because it's untransformed. The Power Rangers version basically amounts to, "Kimberly, can you hit that thing? Yep." And then she does. Zyuranger wins this category, but it's not enough to keep Power Rangers from finally nabbing a win, managing to improve on some of the weaker aspects of its source material. And what a crazy ride this has been. This is why I do this series, for episodes like this, where Power Rangers is put in ridiculous positions and really has to flex its creativity. And while the results are spotty, I love seeing Power Rangers rise to the occasion, especially given how the opposite is far more prevalent. This proves Power Rangers can go off in different story directions and still do better. So thanks for watching. I hope you had a good time. Remember that there is a playlist of all the current MMZU episodes, as well as the entire Zordon era series I covered over a decade ago. I will see you next time!